Introduction. Have you ever felt that the life you are living is not yours? That the words you speak, the desires you feel, the identity you cling to, they were all written by someone else, for someone else's purpose? This is not a poetic metaphor. It is a structural diagnosis. Your life is not a biography. It is an apocrypha, a false scripture attributed to you, authored by hidden hands. You have been reading a script you did not write, performing a role you did not choose, and calling it freedom. The ghostwriters are invisible, but their fingerprints are everywhere, in your ambitions, your fears, your loyalties, your very sense of self. This book is not a comfort. It is a fracture. It will dismantle the illusion of the autonomous self and expose the mechanism that has kept you as a character in someone else's story. By the end, you will not be healed. You will be armed. The pen is waiting. But first, you must see the hand that has been holding it. Chapter 1. The Fracture. You are not the author. You have been told, since the moment you could form a sentence, that you are the author of your own life, that your thoughts are your own, that your choices define you, that the voice inside your head is yours. This is a lie, not a metaphor, not a poetic simplification, a structural, operational falsehood that has been embedded into your consciousness so deeply that you cannot feel the seams. You do not know where you end and the script begins. You are not the author of your life. You are a character, a node, a vessel through which someone else's narrative flows. Your identity is not a biography. It is an apocrypha, a false scripture attributed to you, written by hands you have never seen, for purposes you have never examined. Let us be precise. When you speak, whose words are you using? When you desire, whose hunger is driving you? When you believe, whose conclusion did you inherit without trial? The voice in your head is not a single sovereign entity. It is a chorus of ghosts. Your parents, your teachers, your culture, your media, your institutions, they all have speaking roles in your internal monologue. They wrote the lines before you ever had a chance to audition, and you have been performing them ever since, mistaking recitation for originality. This is the fracture, not a wound, a diagnosis. You do not possess an autonomous self. You possess a borrowed self, a collection of scripts, triggers, and conditioned responses that have been assembled over decades by external systems. Your identity is not a creation, it is a construction, and you were never the architect. Consider the architecture of your inner world. Your values, your fears, your definition of success, your sense of what is possible. Trace each one backward. Where did it originate? Did you derive it from first principles, or did you absorb it from the environment? Did you choose it, or did it choose you? The answer is uncomfortable. Most of what you call you is a composite of instructions you never wrote. Your career path was ghostwritten by economic narratives. Your relationship expectations were ghostwritten by cultural scripts. Your self-worth was ghostwritten by authority figures who needed you to be manageable. Even your rebellion, your supposed independence, is often just another script, written by counterculture systems that profit from your opposition. You are not a rebel, you are a reaction. And a reaction is not a choice, it is a reflex. The illusion of the autonomous self is the most sophisticated control mechanism ever devised. It convinces you that you are free while every major decision, every core belief, every emotional pattern is routed through channels you did not install. You believe you are the pilot, but you are the passenger. You believe you are the writer, but you are the page. This is not an accusation, it is a structural reality, and once you see it, you cannot unsee it. The fracture is not meant to destroy you. It is meant to dislodge you from the false foundation upon which your identity rests. The ground beneath you has never been solid. It has been a stage, a set, a carefully constructed illusion designed to make you believe that the script is reality. You are not the author of your life. You are the character, and until you recognize that you have been reading someone else's lines, you will never hold the pen. This is the first and most brutal truth of the Apocrypha sequence. Your life is not yours. It has been ghost-written, and the author is not you. Let us now examine the mechanism with surgical precision. The fracture is not abstract. It operates through a specific architecture of imprinting. Every external system that touches you, family, education, media, religion, commerce, employs a standard procedure: repetition, emotional conditioning, and authority anchoring. A belief is repeated until it feels like truth. An emotion is attached to a stimulus until it becomes reflex. An authority figure delivers a command until it becomes internal law. This is not persuasion, this is installation. You did not learn to value money, status, or approval. You were imprinted with those values through thousands of small, invisible transactions. A parent's tone of disappointment, a teacher's mark of approval, a screen's promise of belonging. Each transaction wrote a line into your script, and you never read the contract. Consider the emotional triggers that govern your daily behavior. When you feel shame, whose standards are you failing? When you feel pride, whose system are you serving? When you feel fear, whose threat are you responding to? Trace the origin of each trigger and you will find a ghostwriter. Your shame was installed by a parent who needed you compliant. Your pride was installed by a culture that measures worth through production. Your fear was installed by institutions that profit from your obedience. You are not feeling your emotions. You are executing someone else's conditioning. This is the fracture made visible. You are a biological machine running borrowed code. The ghostwriters did not need your consent because they never asked. They simply wrote and you recited. They installed and you executed. The voice in your head that defends your beliefs, that justifies your choices, that claims ownership of your identity, that voice is not you. It is the ghostwriter's final trick, making you believe that the script is your own. It is not. It is an apocrypha, a false scripture attributed to you, and the first step towards sovereignty is not to rewrite it. It is to recognize that it was never yours to begin with. You are standing on a fracture. The ground has split beneath you. The foundation was never real. But this is not destruction. This is the precondition for construction. You cannot build on a lie. You must first see the lie for what it is, feel the ground give way, and accept that you have never been the author. Only then can you begin to become one. Chapter 2. The Ghostwriter's Toolkit. You have now arrived at the threshold of a machine you cannot see. The ghostwriter does not announce itself. It does not sign its name. It operates beneath the threshold of your awareness, embedded in the very architecture of your daily life. To understand how your script was written, you must first examine the tools that wrote it. These tools are not mysterious. They are not supernatural. They are precise, repeatable, and industrial. And they have been operating on you since before you could speak. The first tool is language, not words in the abstract, but the specific vocabulary, syntax, and grammar that were installed into your neural circuitry before you had the capacity to question them. Every language carries a hidden ontology, a map of what exists, what matters, what is possible. When you were taught to say "I am," you were also taught what "I" means. When you learned the word success, you inherited an entire value system compressed into a single syllable. The ghostwriter uses language not as communication, but as programming. The words you use to describe yourself are not yours. They are inherited commands. When you say, "I'm not good enough," you are not reporting a fact. You are reciting a line written by someone who needed you to doubt yourself. The second tool is repetition. A single exposure to a narrative is weak. 1,000 exposures is a neural pathway. The ghostwriter does not need your consent. It only needs your attention, repeated over time. This is why advertisements, slogans, family refrains, and cultural mantras are so effective. They are not arguments, they are grooves. Every time you hear, "You need to be successful," the groove deepens. Every time you hear, "Be yourself," the groove deepens. Every time you hear, "This is just the way things are," the groove deepens. You are not being convinced, you are being conditioned. The ghostwriter does not debate you, it wears you down. The third tool is emotional conditioning. The most powerful scripts are not stored in your logical mind, they are anchored to emotion. Fear, shame, guilt, longing, pride. These are the chemical locks that seal a script into your subconscious. When a parent told you that you were lazy and you felt that sting of shame, that script was installed. When a teacher praised you for being obedient and you felt that warm approval, that script was installed. When a culture told you that you must be extraordinary and you felt that crushing anxiety, that script was installed. The emotion is the glue. Without it, the script would be merely an idea, easily discarded, but with emotion, it becomes a command that fires automatically, beneath thought. The fourth tool is authority. The ghostwriter does not need to be visible, it only needs to be trusted. Parents, teachers, religious leaders, media figures, experts, institutions, these are the authorized transmitters. When you were young, you had no filter. You absorbed whatever was transmitted by the figures around you, and those figures were themselves ghost-written, passing along scripts they never questioned. The chain of transmission is long, and it is invisible. You are not rebelling against authority when you reject one parent's script. You are simply switching to another authority's script. The ghostwriter adapts. It does not need to be consistent. It only needs to be accepted. The fifth tool is the architecture of your environment. The spaces you inhabit, the objects you use, the routines you follow. These are not neutral. They are scripts written in physical form. Your bedroom, your workplace, your city, your nation. Each is a stage designed to evoke certain behaviors and suppress others. When you walk into a classroom, you become a student. When you walk into a church, you become a believer. When you walk into a store, you become a consumer. The environment is a script you step into, and you have been stepping into these scripts your entire life, never realizing that the stage itself is the writer. Now you must see the full picture. The ghostwriter does not use one tool, it uses all of them in concert. Language installs the vocabulary of your identity. Repetition deepens the neural grooves. Emotion locks the scripts into your subconscious. Authority authenticates the transmission. Environment reinforces the performance. And you, the supposed author, have been walking through life reciting lines you never wrote, believing they were your own. This is not a metaphor. This is a diagnostic. The ghostwriter's toolkit is not a philosophical concept. It is a functional description of how your mind was programmed. And once you see the tools, you can no longer pretend that you are the author. You can no longer claim that your thoughts are your own. You can no longer defend the script as if it were sacred. The fracture is complete. You are not the author. You are the page, and the ghostwriter is still writing. But now you know the tools, and knowing the tools is the first step toward reclaiming the pen. Chapter 3. Diagnosis: Tracing the Invisible Hand. You have been told that you are the author of your life, that your thoughts are your own, that your desires, your fears, your ambitions, they emerge from some deep, authentic self that only you can access. This is the foundational lie upon which your entire identity has been constructed, and you have believed it without question. Now you must perform the diagnosis. The ghostwriter's toolkit has been exposed. You know the instruments: repetition, emotional conditioning, authority figures, language itself. But knowing the tools is not the same as identifying the hands that wield them. You must now trace every wire back to its source. You must become a forensic archaeologist of your own mind. Begin with the internal monologue, that voice in your head that narrates your day, judges your actions, tells you what you should and should not do. Whose voice is it really? Listen carefully. The cadence, the vocabulary, the implicit judgments. Is it your mother's voice, reproaching you for not being enough? Is it a teacher's voice, grading your worth? Is it the voice of an advertisement, telling you that happiness is a product you have not yet purchased? The internal monologue is not a spontaneous expression of your essence. It is a recording, a loop, a script that was installed long before you had the capacity to question it. Now examine your emotional triggers. What makes you angry? What makes you ashamed? What makes you feel inadequate? Do not look at the surface event, look beneath it. When you feel that flash of rage at a stranger's comment, what older wound is being activated? When you feel that sinking shame after a perceived failure, whose standard are you failing to meet? Emotions are not pure biological responses. They are signals from the script. They indicate where the ghostwriter has embedded its deepest hooks. The intensity of the emotion is proportional to the depth of the programming. Now move to your core beliefs, not the ones you claim to hold, the ones that actually govern your behavior. Write them down. I believe that I must work harder than everyone else to be worthy. I believe that love must be earned. I believe that safety comes from control. I believe that vulnerability is weakness. Now trace each belief to its origin. When did you first learn this? Who taught it to you? Was it a parent who withheld affection until you performed? Was it a culture that rewarded productivity and punished rest? Was it a religion that taught you that you are fundamentally flawed? Each belief is a line in your script. Each line was written by someone else. Do not stop at the personal. The ghostwriters are not only individuals, they are systems, institutions. The education system that taught you that your value is measured by grades. The corporate structure that taught you that your time is a commodity to be sold. The media apparatus that taught you that your body is a project to be managed. The political framework that taught you that your identity is a category to be defended. These are not neutral environments. They are active authors. They have written your script so thoroughly that you cannot see the pages for the ink. Now you must perform the most difficult step. You must identify the ghostwriter that you have become for yourself. Yes, you have internalized the mechanism so completely that you now ghostwrite your own life. You repeat the scripts without knowing they are scripts. You enforce the standards without knowing they were imposed. You punish yourself for deviations that were never your deviations to begin with. You have become the warden of your own prison, and you call it self-discipline. The diagnosis is not comfortable. It is not meant to be. You will feel exposed. You will feel betrayed. You will feel the weight of a life that was never truly yours. That is the point. The fracture must be complete before the reconstruction can begin. You have been living in an apocrypha, a false scripture attributed to you. Every thought, every desire, every fear, they bear the fingerprints of hidden authors. Now you see them. Now you know where to look. The invisible hand is no longer invisible. It is time to trace it back to its source. But tracing is not enough. You must now calibrate the precision of your diagnosis. A surgeon does not cut based on a vague ache. A surgeon maps the exact coordinates of the tumor before the blade ever touches flesh. You must do the same with the ghostwriters. Precision is the difference between liberation and a new cage disguised as freedom. Start with your daily routines. Every action you repeat without thought is a signature of a ghostwriter. The way you check your phone upon waking, that is not your choice. That is a script written by attention engineers who profit from your fragmentation. The way you organize your day around productivity, that is not your instinct. That is a script written by an economic system that measures human value in output. The way you apologize for taking space, for asking for more, for being inconvenient, that is not your humility. That is a script written by a culture that rewards compliance and punishes presence. These routines are not habits, they are commands, and every command has an author. Now move to your language. The words you use to describe yourself are the most revealing fingerprints of all. Do you say, "I'm just not good at that"? Trace that phrase. Who first told you that you were limited? Do you say, "I have to do this"? Trace the obligation. Who installed the belief that you have no choice? Do you say, "I'm not ready yet"? Trace the condition. Who taught you that worthiness requires preparation? Your vocabulary is a map of your programming. Every phrase is a line of code written by an external hand. Read the code. Identify the programmer. Now examine your fantasies. The future you imagine for yourself, whose template does it follow? The success you dream of, is it the success you were taught to want, or the success you would design in the absence of all influence? The partner you desire, is that a genuine preference, or a composite of images fed to you by cinema, romance narratives, and social expectation? Your fantasies are not escapes from the script. They're often the script's most sophisticated traps, promising a future that still obeys the same rules, the same values, the same definitions of happiness that were installed before you had a say. Now look at your resistance. What do you refuse to examine? What do you defend most fiercely? The areas where you feel most certain are often the areas where the ghostwriting is deepest. Certainty is not truth. Certainty is the lock that the ghostwriter installed to prevent you from opening the door. If you feel an immediate urge to reject this diagnosis, to dismiss it as paranoid or abstract, that urge itself is data. It tells you that a ghostwriter is threatened. It tells you that a script is about to be exposed. The resistance is the confirmation. Now perform the final diagnostic test. Ask yourself this question: if you were stripped of every belief, every value, every desire, every fear, every routine, every word, every fantasy, if you were reduced to pure awareness with no content, what would remain? That silence is the only thing that is yours. Everything else is borrowed. Everything else is a script. The diagnosis is complete when you can feel the difference between the silence and the noise, between the self and the script, between the author and the apocrypha. The invisible hand is no longer invisible. You have traced it. You have mapped it. You have named it. And now, for the first time, you see the difference between what was written for you and what you might write yourself. The fracture is complete. The diagnosis is done. The ghostwriters are identified. The next step is not to destroy them. The next step is to reclaim the pen. Chapter 4. The Architecture of the Script. You have identified the ghostwriters. You have traced their hands back through the lattice of your childhood, your education, your media consumption, your relationships. You have seen the fingerprints on your fears and the watermarks on your desires. But diagnosis without structural understanding is a superficial wound. You must now dismantle the architecture itself. Every ghost-written life is not a random collection of implanted thoughts. It is a closed system, a coherent, self-reinforcing structure built from 4 load-bearing pillars: implanted values, programmed goals, conditioned fears, and borrowed desires. These 4 elements form the skeleton of your script. They are not your own. They were installed before you had the capacity to refuse them, and they have been running uninterrupted ever since. Consider the first pillar: implanted values. You did not choose what you consider good or bad. Your moral compass was calibrated by an external field. The culture, the institution, the family unit, they injected a hierarchy of worth into your neural architecture. You value loyalty because you were punished for independence. You value hard work because you were rewarded for obedience. You value humility because the system fears the sovereign. These are not truths. They are structural supports for a script you never signed. The second pillar: programmed goals. Look at the objectives you chase: the career ladder, the house, the relationship, the status symbol. You believe these are your ambitions. They are not. They are pre-written destinations on a map drawn by the collective ghostwriter. The goal is not to own the house, it is to remain inside the consumption loop. The goal is not to achieve the promotion, it is to stay inside the validation loop. The goal is not to find love, it is to never question the loneliness that the script requires. Your goals are not yours. They are the tracks on which the train of your borrowed life runs. The third pillar: conditioned fears. This is the most efficient control mechanism. Fear is not a survival instinct in the ghost-written life. It is offense. You fear losing your job because the script has made your identity dependent on your function. You fear rejection because the script has made your worth contingent on approval. You fear the unknown because the script has labeled the uncharted as dangerous. Every fear you hold is a wall that keeps you inside the narrative. The ghostwriter does not need to lock the door. It only needs to make you believe there is a monster outside. The fourth pillar: borrowed desires. This is the most insidious. You want things you have never truly wanted. You want the partner because the script says you are incomplete without one. You want the travel because the script says experience is identity. You want the knowledge because the script says knowing is power. But these desires are not generated by your core. They are echoes, reflections of a collective longing designed to keep you reaching, never arriving, always inside the architecture. Now, observe how these 4 pillars interact. They form a closed loop. Your implanted values justify your programmed goals. Your programmed goals activate your conditioned fears. Your conditioned fears suppress your genuine signals, making space for borrowed desires. The loop runs continuously, and you mistake its hum for the sound of your own soul. But here is the fracture within the architecture. The loop is not conscious. It runs on automatic, and automatic systems can be overridden. The moment you see the architecture, you are no longer inside it. You are outside, looking at the blueprint. The values are no longer sacred. They are coded preferences. The goals are no longer necessary. They are predetermined endpoints. The fears are no longer protective. They are programmable fences. The desires are no longer authentic. They are borrowed costumes. The architecture is not infinite. It is a finite set of patterns, repeated generation after generation, installed into consciousness after consciousness. It has no power over you except the power you give it by remaining unaware. The moment you see the blueprint, the building begins to crack. Not from external force, from internal recognition. You are not the architecture. You are the one who was placed inside it, and the one who can now walk out. But walking out requires more than recognition. It requires a surgical dismantling of each pillar, one by one. Begin with the values. Take the one you hold most sacred: justice, loyalty, humility, ambition. Ask not whether it is true, but who benefits from your allegiance to it. Trace its origin to a specific voice: a parent who demanded compliance, a teacher who rewarded submission, a media narrative that framed independence as selfishness. When you see the source, the value loses its sacred weight. It becomes a programmable preference. You may keep it, but now by choice, not by implantation. Next, the goals. Write down the 3 objectives you are currently pursuing. Then ask, what would happen if I stopped? If the career ladder vanished, what would remain? If the relationship dissolved, what would surface? The answer reveals the ghostwriter's intent. The goal is not the goal. The goal is the distraction. The true function of every programmed goal is to keep you inside the architecture, chasing a mirage while your sovereignty starves. Then the fears. Examine each fear as a structural element. Fear of poverty keeps you in the employment loop. Fear of loneliness keeps you in the relationship loop. Fear of irrelevance keeps you in the status loop. Each fear is a wall with a gate you have never tried. The gate is labeled, "What if the fear is false?" Pass through it mentally. The architecture cannot tolerate the question. It will generate panic. That panic is the confirmation that you have touched a real boundary. Finally, the desires. This is the most delicate operation. Borrowed desires feel urgent because they are attached to the script's reward system. But genuine desire does not demand. It whispers. It does not need external validation. It does not require a timeline. To distinguish borrowed from authentic, run this diagnostic. If no one would ever know, if no applause awaited, if no identity were attached, would you still want it? If the answer is silence, the desire was never yours. If the answer is a quiet yes, you have found a signal from the core. The architecture is now exposed. The pillars are cracked. The loop is visible. You stand at the center of a structure that no longer holds you. The ghostwriters have lost their grip because their mechanism depends on your blindness. You are no longer blind. The next step is not to rebuild. It is to reclaim the pen. But before you touch it, you must understand that the architecture you have dismantled will attempt to reconstruct itself. The ghostwriters do not surrender easily. They will flood your mind with doubt, with the comfort of the familiar, with the seduction of the old loop. This is the final test. The architecture is not your home. It was never your home. It was a cage disguised as a shelter. You have seen the blueprint. You have walked the perimeter. Now, the only remaining question is whether you will remain inside the ruin or step into the territory beyond the walls. Chapter 5. Reclassification, from character to author. You have spent your life believing you were the author of your own existence. You felt the pulse of decision, the weight of choice, the dignity of self-direction. But that was a ghost sensation, a phantom limb of a self that never truly governed. The architecture you have now seen, the ghostwriters you have traced, the script you have dissected, they all point to a single irreversible conclusion. You were never a character in your own story. You were a character in someone else's. But here is where the fracture becomes a foundation. The diagnosis is not destruction. The exposure is not execution. You have seen the hidden hand, but seeing it does not free you. Recognition without reclassification is just another trap. The trap of the enlightened victim, the one who knows the prison but remains inside, now bitter with clarity instead of blind with comfort. Reclassification is not a thought. It is not a decision you make with the same mind that was written by others. It is a surgical break in identity, a severing of loyalty to the script that has housed you. You must stop being a reader of your own life and become its writer. But you cannot write with the same hand that was trained to hold the pen for others. The first step of reclassification is the renunciation of the character. The character is the version of you that was written by external forces. It has desires that are not yours, fears that were installed, values that were borrowed, and a trajectory that serves a system, not a sovereign. You have been loyal to this character. You have defended it, fed it, mourned for it, and protected it from change. But that character is not you. It is a construct, a ghost-written persona that you mistook for a soul. To become the author, you must kill the character. Not metaphorically, not gently. You must sever the emotional and psychological investment you have in the story that was written for you. This is not a self-help affirmation. This is a structural demolition. You look at every belief you hold and ask, did I write this, or was it written into me? You examine every desire and trace its origin. You interrogate every fear and ask whose interest it serves. And when you find the ghostwriter's signature, you do not negotiate, you delete. This is the moment of rupture. The old identity does not fade away, it is dismantled. You will feel a vertigo, a hollowing out, because the character gave you a sense of continuity, of being someone. Without it, you are not yet an author. You are a blank page. And that blankness is terrifying to a mind that has never known silence. But it is also the only space where true authorship can emerge. Reclassification installs a new operating identity. You are now the sovereign operator of your own narrative. You do not borrow scripts from culture, family, media, or institution. You do not accept pre-written values, goals, or definitions of success. You become the source. This is not rebellion. Rebellion is still a reaction to the script. This is independence. You are no longer in a dialogue with the ghostwriters. You have left the room. From this position you do not ask, what should I do? That question belongs to the character seeking instructions. You ask, what do I choose to write? The difference is absolute. The first is obedience disguised as inquiry. The second is sovereignty expressed as action. But do not mistake this for permission to improvise. The character improvises within the script's boundaries, thinking it is free. The author does not improvise. The author designs. You must now build your own architecture of values, your own lattice of desires, your own closed system of meaning. You will not borrow, you will not inherit, you will construct. This reclassification is irreversible. Once you have seen the hand behind the curtain, you cannot unsee it. Once you have killed the character, you cannot resurrect it without becoming a liar to yourself. The old scripts will still whisper. The ghostwriters will still try to reclaim you, but you are no longer a reader of their story. You are the author of your own, and an author does not take dictation from ghosts. You are now in the space between identities. The character is dead. The author has not yet written. This is the most dangerous and the most fertile moment of your existence. Do not rush to fill it with borrowed words. Let the silence teach you what your own voice sounds like. Then, and only then, will you be ready to take the pen. Consider the weight of this transition. The character you have killed was not a costume you could remove at will. It was a lattice of neural pathways, conditioned responses, and emotional anchors wired into your nervous system over decades. Every time you felt pride in an achievement, that pride was calibrated to a script you did not write. Every time you felt shame at a failure, That shame was a signal from the ghostwriters, reminding you to stay within the boundaries of the borrowed narrative. Reclassification is not simply a change of mind. It is a recalibration of your entire signal processing system. You must now perform a diagnostic on your own emotional architecture. When a desire arises, for status, for belonging, for security, do not act on it immediately. Trace its lineage. Ask, whose definition of status is this? Whose version of belonging am I seeking? Whose idea of security am I chasing? The answers will reveal the ghostwriters still embedded in your circuitry. Each time you identify one, you sever a wire. Each severed wire reduces the ghost's control over your future decisions. This process is not comfortable. You will feel a phantom pull toward the old scripts, a gravitational force that tries to pull you back into the character's orbit. That pull is not weakness. It is the residue of conditioning. You do not fight it with willpower. You override it with architecture. You install a new protocol. Every time the old script activates, you do not suppress it. You observe it, label it as a ghost signal, and decline to execute it. Over time, the signal weakens. The ghost loses its power to command. Reclassification also demands a redefinition of your relationship with time. The character lived in a timeline written by others. Milestones, ages, deadlines, expiration dates for dreams. The author lives in a timeline of their own design. You no longer measure your life by external clocks. You measure it by the coherence between your written values and your executed actions. Time becomes a resource, not a master. You do not race against it. You allocate it according to your own architecture. And here is the critical distinction. The author does not write in isolation. The ghostwriters will attempt to re-enter your narrative through every available channel, through relationships that expect the old character, through institutions that demand the old compliance, through media that offers the old scripts as comfort. You must establish borders. You must become a closed system. Not closed to information, but closed to unexamined influence. Every external input must pass through your diagnostic filter before it is allowed to shape your narrative. This is the discipline of sovereignty. It is not a one-time event. Reclassification is an installation, but maintenance is a daily protocol. Each morning you survey your internal landscape. You ask, what scripts are trying to reassert themselves today? What ghost signals are whispering in my emotional currents? You do not judge them. You simply identify and delete. The author remains the only source of the narrative. You are now standing at the threshold of a new kind of existence. The character is gone. The blank page is before you. The pen is in your hand, but it is not yet moving. That stillness is not emptiness. It is readiness. The author does not write from compulsion. The author writes from intention, and intention requires a foundation. You must now decide what values will form the bedrock of your new architecture. Not borrowed values, not inherited values. Values you have examined, tested and chosen because they serve your sovereignty. Do not mistake this for a moral framework. Morality is a script written by systems to control characters. Sovereignty is not moral or immoral, it is architectural. You do not ask whether a value is good or bad according to external standards. You ask whether it serves your capacity to write your own narrative without interference. If it does, you install it. If it does not, you discard it. This is the cold logic of the sovereign author. The reclassification is complete when you no longer feel the need to explain yourself to the ghostwriters. When a family member asks why you no longer follow the old script, you do not justify. You do not defend. You simply state, I am writing my own narrative now. When an institution demands compliance, you do not rebel, you disengage. Rebellion is still a relationship with the ghost. Independence is silence. The sovereign author does not argue with the dead. You are now the author. The character is a memory. The ghostwriters are noise. The blank page is your territory. What you write next will determine whether this reclassification was a temporary rupture or a permanent ascension. The pen is in your hand. The silence is yours. Write accordingly. Chapter 6. The Protocol, Reclaiming the Pen. You have been reclassified. The diagnosis is complete. You now see the invisible architecture, the embedded commands, the foreign signatures in your own internal monologue. But seeing the ghost is not the same as exorcising it. Detection is a diagnostic. Reclamation is a protocol. You are now ready for the mechanics of recovery. The protocol is not a meditation. It is not an affirmation. It is not a journaling exercise designed to make you feel empowered while leaving the ghostwriters intact. The protocol is a surgical override of the operating system. You will not rewrite your life by adding new paragraphs to the old script. You will first delete the ghostwriter's access, then reconstruct the lattice from zero. Step 1. The Silence Protocol. For 72 hours, you will speak no unsolicited opinion. You will not defend a position. You will not explain yourself. You will not fill silence with borrowed narratives. This is not passive resistance. It is active surveillance. Every time you feel the urge to speak a judgment, a preference, a belief, you will pause and trace its origin. Why do I believe this? Who benefits from me saying this? Is this signal mine or implanted? The silence is not the goal. The silence is the diagnostic chamber. In the absence of output, the ghostwriters become audible. You will hear the scripts running in the background. You will feel the anxiety of not performing. That anxiety is the leash. You are cutting it. Step 2. The Signature Audit. Take every core belief you hold about yourself. Write it down. Not the surface beliefs, the deep ones. I am not enough. I need to be liked. Success requires suffering. My worth is earned. I must be in control. Now, for each belief, perform the forensic trace. Who installed this? Was it a parent's repeated phrase? A cultural narrative absorbed through media? An institutional doctrine from education or religion? A relationship dynamic that conditioned your self-worth? You will find that almost none of these beliefs originate from your direct experience. They are ghost-written commands. Once you identify the author, you must declare the belief void. Not argued with, not reframed. Declared null. The ghostwriter loses jurisdiction. Step 3. The Script Override. Now you will write the counterscript. Not as a positive affirmation. Those are just new ghostwriters wearing friendly masks. You will write structural commands. Not, I am worthy, but worth is not a variable in my system. Not, I am enough, but sufficiency is the default state, not an achievement. These are not emotional reassurances. They are architectural decrees. You are rewriting the source code, not the user interface. Each decree must be tested against the old script. When the old script triggers an emotional response, fear, guilt, longing, you do not suppress it. You observe it as a residual signal from a deactivated system. The ghostwriter's program is still running in memory, but it has no more authority. You are the only process with right permissions. Step 4. The Behavioral Recalibration. The ghostwriter's script does not live only in your mind. It lives in your habits, your routines, your choices. You must now identify 3 behaviors that are direct outputs of the old script. A job you keep because it validates a borrowed identity. A relationship that exists to fulfill a programmed need. a habit that soothes the anxiety of the ghostwriter's demands. You will terminate one of these behaviors within 7 days, not gradually, not with a transition plan. You will sever it. The ghostwriter's script cannot survive if its output channels are closed. This is not about comfort. This is about signal integrity. The system must be rebooted from a clean state. Step 5. The sovereignty installation. For the next 30 days, you will write one command each morning. Not a goal, not a resolution. A command. Today, I will not perform for approval. Today, I will not seek external validation. Today, I will not explain my choices. Today, I will not let the ghostwriter's anxiety dictate my actions. Each command is a line of new code. Each day, you overwrite a subroutine. By day 30, the old script will be fragmented. The ghostwriter's signal will be noise. You will no longer need to fight the script. You will simply not hear it. This is the protocol. It is not a process of healing. It is a process of deletion and reconstruction. You are not fixing a broken self. You are dismantling a constructed one. The ghostwriters will resist. They will send anxiety, guilt, nostalgia, the pull of the familiar. That resistance is the confirmation that you are cutting the right wires. The more they scream, the closer you are to sovereignty. You now hold the pen. The protocol is the method. Execute it. But execution requires precision, not enthusiasm. The ghostwriters have contingency protocols of their own. They will attempt to reinstall themselves through the back door of your own fatigue. When you are tired, hungry, or emotionally depleted, the old script will offer itself as comfort. It will whisper that the protocol is too harsh, that you are being extreme, that a little compliance is harmless. This is the ghostwriter's last defense, the seduction of the familiar. You must recognize this as a signal, not a truth. The fatigue itself is a ghost-written subroutine, a command to return to the default state. When it arrives, do not negotiate, do not reason. You simply execute the override command. This is a residual pattern. It has no authority. Then you proceed. Consider the ghostwriter's architecture more carefully. It is not a single author, but a consortium of authors, each with a different jurisdiction. Your professional script was written by institutions and economic systems. Your relational script was written by family dynamics and cultural conditioning. Your emotional script was written by media and peer reinforcement. Each of these ghostwriters operates on a different frequency, but they share a common vulnerability. They cannot survive direct inspection. When you shine the light of conscious examination on a belief, its origins become visible and its power collapses. The protocol is that light, applied systematically. There is a common error at this stage, the belief that you must replace the old script with a new, better script before you can act. This is the ghostwriter's trap. They want you to remain in the planning phase because planning is safe and does not threaten their control. The protocol demands action before understanding is complete. You do not need to know what you will become. You only need to know what you are no longer accepting. The deletion is the priority. The reconstruction will emerge from the vacuum you create. The ghostwriters will also attempt to convert the protocol into another identity. They will tempt you to become the person who performs the protocol, who speaks about the protocol, who wears the protocol as a badge. This is a subtle hijack. The protocol is not a new costume for the self. It is a method for dismantling the self. You are not becoming a sovereign author. You are ceasing to be a character. The distinction is critical. A character performs. An author creates without performance. The protocol is the bridge between these states, but it is not a destination. You will encounter moments of profound emptiness during the execution. The old script gave you a constant stream of meaning, purpose, and anxiety. Without it, there is a void. The ghostwriters will tell you this void is dangerous, that it means you are lost, that you must fill it immediately. They are lying. The void is the space where your own signal can emerge. It is not an absence of meaning, it is the absence of borrowed meaning. You do not need to fill it. You need to learn to inhabit it. The protocol teaches you to sit in that void without reaching for the old scripts. This is the final test of sovereignty. You now have the pen. The protocol is the method. Execute it without negotiation, without delay, without the ghostwriter's permission. The only thing standing between you and sovereignty is the execution of these steps. The ghostwriters have no power over what you do in the next 5 minutes. Use them. Chapter 7. Irreversible Force, Rewriting the Apocrypha. You have traced the invisible hand. You have diagnosed the architecture of the script. You have reclaimed the pen. But a tool without an act is still a ghost in your hand. You now stand at the threshold where diagnosis becomes execution, where the Apocrypha is not merely recognized, but rewritten. This is the moment of irreversible force. The Apocrypha is not a harmless fiction. It is a functioning program that runs your nervous system, your decision-making, your emotional responses, and your sense of self. Every day you leave it intact, you are running a foreign operating system on your own mind. The ghostwriters do not need to rewrite you again. They only need you to remain passive. Your passivity is their maintenance protocol. To rewrite the Apocrypha is not to edit a few lines. It is to delete the entire document and begin from zero. This is not a gradual process. Gradual change is a trap designed by the ghostwriters to keep you within their narrative frame while giving you the illusion of progress. They allow you to change the font, the margins, the cover art, but the text remains theirs. Real rewriting is an act of destruction followed by construction. You must first burn the library before you can build your own. The protocol is simple in structure but brutal in execution. You will take each domain of your life, identity, relationships, work, purpose, values, fears, desires, and you will ask one question: whose script is this? You will trace it back to its origin. You will identify the ghostwriter. Then you will delete it. Not modify it, delete it. The void that remains is not a weakness. It is a blank page. And a blank page is the only legitimate foundation for sovereignty. The deletion is the irreversible force. Once you see that your desire for approval was written by a system that profits from your insecurity, you cannot unsee it. Once you recognize that your fear of failure was installed by institutions that need you compliant, the fear loses its command. The ghostwriter cannot survive exposure. Their power is entirely dependent on your ignorance when you know they are powerless. But knowledge alone is not rewriting. The ghostwriters have a secondary defense. They make you believe that knowing is enough. They want you to become a spectator of your own awakening, a connoisseur of insight who never acts. This is their most sophisticated trap. They allow you to accumulate revelations as long as you never execute them. You become a collector of truths that remain inert in your mind, while your life continues to run their script. You must break this loop. The act of rewriting is not intellectual. It is behavioral. You will not think your way out of the Apocrypha. You will act your way out. Every time you catch yourself repeating a ghost-written line, a belief, a reaction, a desire, you will stop. You will say, "This is not mine," and you will choose something else, not because it is better, but because it is yours. The quality of the choice is secondary to the sovereignty of the choice. This is the irreversible force, the capacity to choose against the script. Each time you do, you weaken the ghostwriter's hold. Each time you do, you strengthen your own authorial muscle. The script will resist. The ghostwriters will whisper that you are being reckless, ungrateful, dangerous. That is the sound of their power dying. Let them scream. Your silence is their silence. Your authorship is their extinction. The Apocrypha will not disappear overnight. But the first act of rewriting creates a fracture that cannot be sealed. Once you have written one sentence that is truly yours, the entire architecture of the borrowed life begins to collapse. The ghostwriters cannot sustain a narrative that has even one authentic line. Their system requires total compliance. A single act of sovereignty is a virus in their code. You are now the author. The pen is in your hand, the page is blank. The ghostwriters are watching, waiting for you to hesitate. Do not write the first line. It does not need to be perfect, it only needs to be yours. The rest will follow. The Apocrypha dies the moment you begin to write your own scripture. And what you write next will determine whether you remain a character in someone else's story or become the sovereign author of your own. The force is irreversible. The pen is yours. The page awaits. Write. Consider the specific ghostwriter that has ruled your relationship with time. The script says you are perpetually behind, that productivity is a moral virtue, that rest must be earned. Trace it. Who installed that? A parent who measured your worth by achievement, a school system that rewarded compliance over creativity, a media economy that monetizes your urgency. Now delete it, not modify it. Delete the entire frame. Time is not a resource to be optimized. It is the medium in which you create. When you stop racing, you begin writing. The ghostwriter's time script collapses the moment you sit still without apology. Consider the ghostwriter that governs your identity. The script says you are a role, employee, parent, partner, citizen, and that your value is tied to performance in that role. Trace it. Who wrote that? Institutions that need predictable units, a culture that conflates doing with being, a family lineage that passed down duty as destiny. Delete it, not soften it. Delete the architecture that reduces you to function. You are not a role. You are a point of origin. Roles are costumes you wear, not skeletons you inhabit. The ghostwriter's identity script disintegrates when you act from being rather than from function. Consider the ghostwriter that scripts your fear. The script says certain losses are catastrophic, certain risks are fatal, certain boundaries are forbidden. Trace it. Who installed that fear? A parent who projected their own terror onto you, a society that punishes deviation, a media machine that amplifies threat to keep you docile. Delete it, not negotiate with it. Delete the entire threat assessment system that was not calibrated by your own experience. Fear is a signal, not a commander. When you act, despite the ghostwriter's warning, you sever its wiring permanently. The irreversible force is not a single act. It is a cascade. Each deletion weakens the next ghostwriter. Each sovereign choice recalibrates your internal compass. The ghostwriters cannot survive in a system that constantly questions their authorship. They require silence, compliance, automaticity. You are now a diagnostic machine running on every domain of your life. You will not stop. You will not rest until every line of the Apocrypha is either deleted or exposed as borrowed. The ghostwriters will attempt a final maneuver. They will try to convince you that your new script is also borrowed, that you are simply replacing one Apocrypha with another, that sovereignty is an illusion. This is their death rattle. It is a logical trap designed to paralyze you. Recognize it. The difference between a borrowed script and a sovereign one is not its content, it is its origin. A sovereign script is chosen, not inherited. It is constructed, not installed. It is yours, even if it resembles another's, because you have examined it, questioned it, and affirmed it through your own authority. The ghostwriter's final trick is to make you doubt the very possibility of authorship. Do not fall for it. The act of choosing is itself the proof of sovereignty. You are now the author. The pen is in your hand. The page is blank. The ghostwriters are watching, waiting for you to hesitate. Do not write the first line. It does not need to be perfect. It only needs to be yours. The rest will follow. The Apocrypha dies the moment you begin to write your own scripture. And what you write next will determine whether you remain a character in someone else's story or become the sovereign author of your own. The force is irreversible. The pen is yours. The page awaits. Write. Conclusion. The Apocrypha has been identified, the ghostwriters have been named, the script has been laid bare on the table, its mechanisms exposed, its architecture dismantled. But knowing is not rewriting. Diagnosis is not sovereignty. You now stand at the threshold where the pen is in your hand, and the question is no longer who wrote your life, but what you will write. This is the irreversible force. Not the comfort of a finished story, but the cold demand of a blank page. You are no longer a character awaiting instruction. You are the architect of a new signal, and every word you choose will either reinforce the old ghostwriting lattice or install a new command. The Apocrypha ends here, not because the book closes, but because you close the loop. The next transmission will not comfort you. It will force you to confront the terror of absolute authorship, the silence after the ghostwriters are silenced. For now, sit with this. The pen is yours. The script is yours. The life you live from this moment forward is a sovereign act, not a borrowed sentence. Write accordingly.